DC. You might recall back in April, we had our good friend John Gonzalez of the U.S. Chamber speak to our group, and he talked a lot about what was going on with the PPPs and phase one, phase two. Well, today we're lucky. We have Tom Sullivan with us, and he is the Vice President of Small Business Policy for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a great ally of the Georgetown Chamber up in D.C. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of Tom. He's got an awesome bio, but again, we just want to make sure that you guys do use the the chat feature, and we'll have some time for some moderated questions later on. So Tom, welcome. I'm going to do your bio. I know I hate when people read my bio and you're like, but it's, you have a great history. I mean, Tom works with Chambers of Commerce and the U.S. Chamber nationwide network. He harnesses the views of small business and translates the grassroots, I love grassroots power, into federal policies that bolster free enterprise and reward entrepreneurship. He's been previously the government relations for Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough LLP. He served under President George W. Bush as the highest ranking government official charged with exclusively advocating the views and needs of small business before government agencies in Congress. I guess he is still an attorney, so we won't hold that against him, but he has a law degree as well as his bachelor's from Boston College. He lives in Virginia with his wife and two sons. Tom, welcome. Thank you for being here and being a part of that. And we look forward to hearing your presentation today.
Oh, thank you, Jim. In my defense, I am an attorney. I was a government official for a while. However, I married a Texan. So,
oh my, what part of, Tom, I have to ask, what part of Texas is she from?
Her family is now in Katy. I think she's got a lot of roots on both sides of the family in Memorial, just outside of Houston.
Perfect. Wonderful.
So we used to go there and visit a lot, and now we're on the phone a lot.
I was trying to do a chat.
Wonderful.
But you know, things have been going pretty well since being over at the U.S. Chamber. When I was a government official, I would have to say I'm an attorney and I'm here to help. And that was, there was always uncomfortable laughter after that line. So Jim, I certainly don't have to tell you, but I will brag on you a little bit. You know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's muscle is not just John Gonzalez, but it's cloning John Gonzalez 1,600 times and having this incredible network of over 1,600 local and state chambers of commerce who, when there is a crisis at hand, do everything possible to make Congress react and provide for the business community. And I think with regards to the coronavirus pandemic, like there's no greater example of local chambers, U.S. Chamber, other business organizations, all kind of joining together to try and help the business community. Now, I'm a little biased. I see the world through the lens of small business, but certainly the entire business community is something that you and 1,600 other of your closest friends work every day very hard to kind of promote and advocate and change laws to make sure that they benefit. So if we go back 90 days before we even knew what Zoom was, other than an old TV show dating back close to 40 years ago, you know, we go back those 90 days, it seems like 90 months ago, but it really wasn't. I mean, it was just over a quarter, you know, a fiscal quarter, which in the context of things isn't that long, but for me at least, it seems like a real long time ago. But if we look back at that time and we knew that the coronavirus was going to impact the United States in a really bad way, the ability of chambers of commerce to come together and work with Congress and the White House to pass 3 laws in 3 months is really pretty amazing. Now we're going to amend that because there's 2 more laws that I'll talk about a little bit to help small business that have passed a little bit more recently. But at the starting point, it was all hands on deck, everybody fighting together to make sure that there was an economic plan to keep the business community afloat in the United States. So there were 3 laws in 3 weeks that were passed in March. It was a hell of a month. I'm going to focus primarily on that last law called the CARES Act, because the CARES Act provides a push of money, a stimulus out to the small business community. Some is working better, and there's a lot of work to do to make sure that it works as well as it can, to make sure that Main Street America comes out of the pandemic in a strong position. I'm also going to touch briefly on some data, because folks like me never talk about data when it's really bad news, but when there's something good to say, then that's almost all that you hear about. And quite frankly, right now, when you look at a comparison of what's going on in the middle of June compared to what went on in the middle of March, there's actually a pretty good story to tell. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data as well. And that comes out of a MetLife and U.S. Chamber Small Business Coronavirus Impact Poll. That's quite a mouthful. That was just released last week. And there have been 3 months of these impact polls. So first of all, let's get at the CARES Act and some of the stimulus that came out of it. So there's 2 flows of money that John Gonzalez probably has talked with you all about. I'll dig in a little bit more deeply. The first is SBA's disaster loan program. The second is the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, both of these really have no credibility unless they have an acronym. That's basically the rule in Washington, D.C. You're no good unless you have an acronym associated with your name. And SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the acronym is EIDL. The Paycheck Protection Program, that you actually can't say without spitting on your computer screen, is the PPP. Both of those have legitimacy for other reasons, but for now, let's just give them legitimacy because of the acronym. Now, first of all, the EIDL program. Now, I may not have done as good of a job 2 months ago at setting expectations. So I bear some blame here, and I'm happy to accept that. But we skipped, when we were in a rush to tell businesses, like, we are here to help. We have worked with Congress and the White House. We have moved heaven and earth to get money to you. We then shoved at them these terms of EIDL and PPP. And unfortunately, Jim, it created a little bit of a false expectation. And so I'm going to try to set the record straight to try to calm some of the frustration that's happened. The EIDL program at SBA is not a new program. It is also not a fast program. It is not a program intended to bring quick liquidity to small businesses. And admittedly, I don't think I did as good of a job as I could have very early on in the pandemic and saying to small business owners, I'm sorry, you are gonna drop everything. You are gonna apply for an SBA disaster loan, but it could be 2 to 3 months before you hear back.
Wow.
In hindsight, I wish I had explained it the way that I just did. This is a 60-year program. The program is designed to have communities rebuild, not to get through, but to rebuild after a disaster. Those disasters are hurricanes, fires, floods, tornadoes. Never on earth would they think that it would also encounter a pandemic, but we're living in a different time right now. But when you look at the intention and the creation of this program, it's a little bit easier to understand why it is as slow as it is, because it was never intended really to deal with a pandemic. The terms of a loan for the economic injury disaster loans, it's a 30-year fixed rate, 3.75% loan. It's not on this slide, but pre-pandemic, it was up to $2 million. Now, this probably won't surprise anybody right now, but the sheer volume of applications for these disaster loans immediately limited the availability of money. Mm-hmm. And so SBA, to try to spread a bit, started capping these loans. I don't know of any small business owners that actually has gotten over $1 million in the EIDL program for the current pandemic. Currently, they are operating under a $150,000 cap. Let's see. So those are all things that have gone on historically with SBA. This is money that goes directly from government to a small business owner. Very different from the PPP, which relies on the private banking and lending institutions. This is a direct from government loan. There's one change to the program from the CARES Act. That change was to allow an applicant for an EIDL to apply for up to $10,000 advance. SBA interpreted that language to say $1,000 per employee. We actually have seen many small businesses receiving these cash advances. Actually, more have received cash advances than actual EIDL loans right now. And those are grants. Those are not loans. Those are intended to kind of get small businesses through some very difficult times. And then eventually there is the loan. Now, there has been some problems with EIDL because SBA, quite frankly, has not been able to, never really anticipated the types of volume. One challenge that I've heard from tons of small businesses, how am I supposed to find out if my application went in, or what's the status of my application? And to SBA's credit, they have really staffed up their customer service and their staffing for this. They have both an 800 number, they have an email, and then once you are assigned a loan number, there's actually a portal where you can enter in that disaster loan number, and it gives you an update of where your loan is, and when you can expect a negotiation and a disbursement. I will say, Jim, in the last few weeks, as more of these EIDL program loans have been dispersed to small businesses, I'm getting more and more familiar with the covenants in the actual loan documents.
Okay.
They are tough. They are really, really tough. I actually work with two small businesses who are part of our small business council who have looked at the restrictions in these loan documents and said, I can't do that. For instance, there's a landscaper out of Dallas who I work with regularly. And one of these covenants in the loan is you can't actually sell any of your property assets without the approval of SBA. And this gentleman who has a thriving landscape business just outside of Dallas, he just can't be constrained by what could be a time-consuming decision process to sell a tractor or a pickup truck in order to free up cash for the various needs that he has. And I don't think that he's going to actually take the EIDL loan. And he was one of the first to file for an EIDL back in, he filed third week of March, and then he had to file again because the CARES Act passed, and he was then eligible to receive these cash advances per employee. And he may not take the loan. So
Tom, can I ask you a quick question on that? So if you're hearing that it's covered saying that there's a lot of information out there, have you seen any good, besides the consulting with your attorney and all, have you seen any good guidance on navigating the terms of those EIDL loans?
I have not.
Okay.
And the reason I mention it actually specifically for hindsight's a blessing.
Right.
We have some hindsight now. I think in hindsight, our friends at SBA should have put the standard loan documents up online for everybody to see. Because there are many small businesses who would look at these covenants in the loan saying, there's no way in heck I can agree to that. There are things like ownership changes that would never happen in some businesses, but really are part of the business model in others. and
Right.
don't want to be constrained by having to ask SBA for approval before taking on additional equity investors, for instance, not even reaching up to a majority shareholder. So,
Mm.
and the reason I'm balking a little bit about good advice is because each one of these lending decisions is really specific to the individual small business owner. But I'm glad you asked me the question, because it's worth all of our business members knowing, take a hard look at this loan document before you agree. And this is a substantial, you're taking on a substantial debt. I mean, a 30-year fixed term for 3.75% interest, you're taking on additional debt, which always has to be a difficult decision by a small business owner. So taking the time to understand it is certainly worth the time. And Jim, if you get member questions after this, I do have a redacted copy of a standard disaster loan application. A friend of mine sent me theirs the other day. I scrubbed through it and, X'd out all the personal information. Happy to share that with you.
Wonderful. And Tom, we're getting questions, and just so that everybody listening, I'm keeping track of all the questions, and at the end, I'll moderate those over to you, Tom. So for those who are sending the questions on the chat, we'll get to those towards the end. So
sure,
carry
thanks.
on.
So thank you. So I'm going to shift. So we were just talking about the SBA disaster loans. Remember, this is a historical program, not fast, long-term debt loan obligations directly from government to business. Now we're going to shift. Whoa. All right, last time that happened, that's when both my boys signed on to their Xbox. We're going to shift now to the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, this is a brand new lending program that was stood up by the CARES Act, and I emphasize that because really it's amazing. SBA did more than 3 years of lending in 3 weeks. Like, that's the magnitude of this type of program. So the Paycheck Protection Program is a new loan program. Basically, the terms are, it's a 2-year loan. That was changed, and I'll get into that, for 1% interest. But the actual attractiveness of the Paycheck Protection Program loans are that these loans, if they meet certain criteria, can be forgiven. They get turned into grants. Now, that makes it pretty darn attractive to small businesses, saying, oh, it's free money, right? Well, as my mom used to tell me, nothing is free. And I guess when you're talking with a government program, that deserves to be underlined and in bold. So this, when several weeks ago, when you heard discussion about $349 billion lending program, this is the program folks were talking about. And there are 2 things to remember about PPP. First of all, how do you decide what the amount of a loan should be? And the law lays this out. The law says you take last year's earnings, payroll, excuse me. You take last year's payroll, you take your average employee salary up to 100,000. You can't count above 100,000. Then you take the average monthly payroll, multiply by 2.5. That is your loan amount. Now, you fast forward what used to be 8 weeks, but Congress just passed a law that says you have 24 weeks. So fast forward 24 weeks. And as long as you spend 60% of that on payroll, 40% for other expenses that are written into the law, those are utilities, including transportation costs, rent, interest on mortgage, and interest on prior debt obligations. If those calculations add up, you go back to the lender or the banker at the end of 24 weeks or at the end of the spending period, and your loan is forgiven. Now, I wish it were as easy as that. You go back and your loan, your lender or your bank actually gets the information together. You agree on the percentages, and then the lender then submits that to SBA, SBA has 90 days to say thumbs up, thumbs down. We have heard that they will be looking at loans above 2 million with green eye shades, I guess is the best way to put it. They'll be looking pretty intensely at loans above $2 million. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have them. It just means you better have your T's crossed and your I's dotted before the bank submits that information. Then SBA replies back to the bank, and then you get your forgiveness. That's the process. Now, the amount that is not forgiven is simply converted into what is now can be a 5-year 1% loan. Anything prior to last Friday is a 2-year 1% loan, but loans, so there's still so there's $123 billion left. So so there's still $123 billion left. So if you get a PPP loan after this past Friday, your bank does have the option of turning it into a 5-year loan, which is different. So last week they tried to simplify this whole program, and I think they did a pretty good job. And that's one of the changes.
So Tom, just to summarize, if you had it before last Friday, it's 2-year loan. It's, if you do it now, if you waited, you actually get more time to pay it back if it is a loan. Is that, am I summarized?
So the percentage, yes, and thank you for asking that. The percentage that is not forgiven.
Okay.
It is, honestly, Jim, it is hard to calculate out, and every small business is different.
Right.
But it is hard to calculate out for 24 weeks where 60% of those loan proceeds would not be attributed to payroll and 40% towards the utilities. I'm sure there are examples of what can't be.
Right.
But I think the vast majority, given Congress's changes to the flexibility, the vast majority will be forgiven. And I do want to emphasize one thing towards the end of those 24 weeks. As much as the borrower and the lender can agree on the information submitted to SBA, the better off we all will be.
So
if there are disagreements between the borrower and the lender and information goes to SBA, I foresee a very messy process that can be, quite frankly, divisive amongst the business community. And I'm hoping that not take place. I think that we have enough time between now and 24 weeks from now to ensure that that doesn't happen. But
right.
there's some storm clouds that are on the horizon that I'm trying my best to prevent.
Tom, would you, and I'm going to summarize that, and maybe, do you feel like, so there's that, once everything gets submitted, you agree with your lender, it goes up to 90 days for the SBA to review.
Yep.
It sounds like, because that's a lot of loans and a lot of grants for the SBA to be looking at, and it sounds like if there's agreement between the business and the lender, that's how it's going to help the SBA in that review process. But if they don't see the agreement, that's where you're going, as a small business owner, you might run into some more challenges.
I believe so. And I also believe that everyone will benefit in the length of time that is now bearing itself out, because some of those loans have already been spent in full. Mm-hmm. And some of those small businesses have already met, with the T's crossed and the I's dotted, the percentage of payroll and the percentage of other expenses. And the beauty of the system is that they then need liquidity, and they get this information with their lenders to SBA in the near term, that they're not waiting till September, October, or November. And then SBA reviews and comes back, so that you have this kind of rolling admissions process through the August, September, October, November timeframe, which does not present the type of crunch that has caused some problems at the front end of the process that we're trying to overcome now. So I'm optimistic that that will happen, although we've got a long way to go because these terms were written in governmentese, which means that very simple concepts have become very complicated. And I think it's going to take a while to flush out. I did notice one mistake on the prior slide, and I apologize, that this whole program ends on New Year's Eve. Okay. Not June 30th, but New Year's Eve, December 31st. I'll fix that for the next Texas chamber who I speak with. Just a couple of tidbits on kind of the chronology. So April 3rd was kickoff. I love to use sports metaphors because there are no sports right now. At that point, there were only 1,800 lenders who were providing these loans. You fast forward to now, you've got over 5,400 lenders. This was actually a huge success point for the government who, I think Congress took a chance in saying, look, we might be good at overseeing stuff, but we're not really good at customer service lending money. So let's let bankers in Georgetown and throughout the country do what they do best. And there was a leap of faith to try to give this to the lending and financial institutions and banks. I think that they did the right thing. And at least from a numbers perspective, that's borne out to have 5,400 lenders providing these PPPs. There was a staggered process. In hindsight, quite frankly, I think they should have done it in reverse. I think they should have done the self-employed first and then had the employers back in because self-employed have need a little bit extra help. But you may recall 2 months ago, seems like 2 years ago, but April 16th, SBA ran out of money. I mean, it was insane. That whole first tranche of PPP funding was just crazy. And so then with your help and the help of all these chambers around the country, we convinced Congress to give more money. We are now in that second tranche of money, and there's still $123 billion left. And a couple of other things happened in between. The whole Shake Shack controversy happened, where SBA said, even though we said all the employers can come in and have access to this money, what we really meant was you have to certify an economic need that without this PPP, you wouldn't survive the pandemic. And so there was this big controversy about whether or not publicly traded companies have access to liquidity that other small businesses don't and are more deserving of the PPP program. That was actually done after these loans started to be made, and there's some larger small businesses that were pretty pissed about kind of changing the rules. It's kind of like building the airplane in the middle of a flight. In defense of all of the frustration that's gone on, because there's been frustration certainly by small businesses, there's been frustration by government officials, and there's been frustration by the financial and banking and lending community. In defense to all of that frustration that has all been pushing in the positive direction to help small business, the advocacy community that I am blessed to work in, we were trying to figure out which should we push Congress for, speed or perfection. And we were told by small business, speed. Like, it's going to be messy, it's going to be crazy, but we need cash yesterday. And so that was our hue and cry. And I think some of the messiness has been because we emphasize speed and not perfection. I think in hindsight, we still made the right decision, but it's been messy. And there's been a lot of frustration, and there's been justifiable frustration, especially by small businesses. So as of last week, over 4 million loans, close to 4.5 million loans. 5,400 lenders have doled out about $510 billion. This loan size has gone down, which actually kind of makes sense. You know, there's been a lot of press about people having unfair advantage and stuff. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist. I think if we step back and look at common sense, a larger small business that has taken out a bunch of really big loans to build that business over the years is more likely to have a banker on speed dial than a self-employed individual that has been very debt conscious, has never taken out a loan, is a great bank customer, but doesn't need the direct dial of a banker.
Right.
And the person with a lender and a banker, a national bank's regional vice president or a community bank's CEO, like, yeah, they're probably going to get a loan faster than someone who then, oh my gosh, I've never taken out a loan. Who do I call? I've been a customer of this bank for 25 years, but I've never had to borrow any money. It's going to be harder for that second individual to get a loan. And the numbers bear that out, because not only would it be harder, and many of those got shut out from that first round, it also will be a lower dollar amount. And so what we're starting to see is that the self-employed, the independent contractors, the 1099 earners, they're getting their loans now. Actually, I was on the phone earlier with a small business owner up in New Jersey who's waiting for her loan from Cabbage. And it's a relatively small loan. And so that's why the loan size, it started out with actually several $100,000 average loan size. It's now down to an average loan size of $114,000. Tomorrow is actually a big day. Tomorrow, both the House and the Senate committees are having their first oversight hearings on PPP. Both Secretary Mnuchin of the Treasury and Administrator Carranza of SBA are testifying. And so I've called this the BYOP hearing. Bring your own popcorn. There'll be a lot of interest in what comes out of tomorrow. I'm actually very optimistic. I think that the frustration by the small business community has actually led to some changes. Last week's changes in the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act are a direct result of small businesses pushing Congress for some changes, because the situation now, where in Texas a lot of businesses have reopened, very different from the situation in the middle of March, where everyone was saying everything is closed, no one can go to work. And so obviously the capital needs of small businesses are different now than they were in the middle of March as well. So I give SBA a lot of credit. I give Congress a lot of credit for saying, you know, things have changed, and we need to give small businesses flexibility. So tomorrow, when we're looking at the congressional hearings, I'm also optimistic, because I think out of that, those officials will hear more of the frustrations of small business and continue to build the airplane in the middle of the flight to make it better, make it fly better, and hopefully to make it land better, quite frankly, to go forward with that airplane metaphor. One last thing, Jim. You've heard this a ton, but I really do want to make a plea to your membership. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we do not want any business to fail simply because they didn't understand how to translate governmentese. And we have done everything possible to work with you and to work with our other partners to try to put governmentese into easy to understand information, or I guess easier. None of it is really easy, but easier information to understand. We have a platform designed to do that. I know that your chamber and others all have incredible portals to help your membership. And we're there to help. I mean, we have all these resources in English and Spanish. I know you already use them. In this case, imitation is absolutely the most sincere form of flattery. And we want to make sure that that information helps your members understand this information and be able to get past the pandemic in an even stronger position than they went in. It's going to take time. Getting back to that first slide where I talked about data, Data released from our MetLife and U.S. Chamber poll from last week show that close to 80% of small businesses across the country are in some stage of reopening. And so synonymous with those reopenings are some increased optimism. So we see increased optimism that 2021 will be a employment increase. More and more small businesses are saying they'll be back to 2020 levels of employment and actually 2019 levels of employment next year. That's the good news. The bad news is we also see a rising percentage of small business saying it's going to be more than 6 months before we're really back in action. So we kind of have this this yin and yang of, yes, good news of reopening, more pragmatic news of it's going to take longer to have a full recovery. Okay. So with that, Jim, let's jump right into the chat. Is that okay?
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, I've been tracking all the questions, so it'd be a little bit easier towards the end, so I'm not scrolling through. And I'm gonna start with idle, and then I'll go to PPP based on the ways that the questions came in.
Hey, you know, Jim, those acronyms just roll off your tongue. You're a pro.
Oh man, to your point, yes, they've made it a lot easier to follow. Second thing is, I will compliment the U.S. Chamber. Those documents, we've been regularly communicating those out to our members. I mean, we have them in our office. Even the template, the U.S. Chamber has a great template where you can pick and choose which things that you want to have in your office about hand washing and buffets and everything. Take advantage of those resources. Allison in her office has done a great job of putting them on our website and linking back to the U.S. Chamber. So idle loans, can you still, some of these are probably yes and no, but can you still apply for idle loans?
You can. So SBA has limited new applications to farmers and agricultural businesses.
Okay. That's what I thought. How are the loans actually calculated? You talked about going through this loan document. How are you able to, I guess it's kind of a moot point because unless you're in agricultural, you might not be able to apply, but how were those loans calculated?
Well, this is interesting because pre-April 17th, the applications are still in the queue.
Okay.
So you got your idle application in pre-April 17. You actually still have a conversation to have with an SBA loan specialist. These conversations are much more like the conversations you would have with a loan officer at a bank than you would think.
Okay.
Now, given the fact that they've had over 2.5 million idle applications, they've tweaked it a little bit. The latest information is that if you have a loan request under a certain amount, so I believe it's a loan request under 150,000, and your credit score is high enough. Now, I don't have an exact number, and I think what we're going to find out in tomorrow's hearing is that SBA could do a better job in transparency. But if you've requested under $150,000, you have a pretty good credit score. SBA is working with a technology company. It's the same technology company that is the backroom operation for Rocket Mortgage, that sends out an email that says, Jim, thank you for applying for your idle loan. You've been approved up to $150,000. And there's this little slider on the email that says, if you would like a loan for less, slide the button on this email and click send. It's kind of this interesting electronic communication that does, it actually makes a lot of sense. You can you can clear hundreds of thousands of applications if you match an application with a credit score and automatically generate an email. I mean, you think about the human capital that would be needed to do that. Right. And eliminate that through technology and efficiencies. So right now, what we're hearing from a lot of small businesses is they receive that email, they click the number, they hit send, and then they go in and they check on their application a few days later, and it shows that it's in progress. Now the big alert is when you get what's called, I think, a soft ping on your credit. And that's SBA checking. And then there are many small business owners who have told me that the money just shows up in their bank account. They then get the loan documents, which is weird to me because I thought that the order was different. But you then get the loan documents and it says, do you agree to all these things? You still have a chance to say no, you return the money, but you either get the documents before or after. It is not a consistent kind of process. Okay. And then you enter into the agreement with SBA. Now, at some point in the process, and this is kind of a bottleneck, at some point in that process, you do hear from an SBA loan specialist, and they do talk you through what it means to have this long-term debt obligation. Very similar to the conversations that small business owners have with bankers in ordinary times. So that part of the loan process, which is a human part, is a bottleneck just because we're people. We take too long to have these conversations.
Wonderful. So one of the, well, not wonderful, bottlenecks are not wonderful. Somebody had asked, and I think you just answered, so you get the idle funding, can you return the money if you get those terms? I guess what you're saying is you can return the money if you decide that those terms and conditions, the covenants don't work for you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Regarding the covenants, are they only in place while there's an outstanding loan balance? Or so I guess like if you took out $150,000 using your person that does the lawn the lawnscaping, I can't speak today all of a sudden, and they pay off the loan, then those things go, I assume that they go away and they could sell equipment without contacting the SBA?
That is accurate. Yeah. Okay. All the obligations are off once you're in complete satisfaction of the loan. There's no early payment penalty on these loans. I'd be hard to believe. It would be hard, Jim, with a hassle associated with these. It'd be hard for me to believe that folks would use it for quick liquidity. But every small business is different, and I got to be careful because those differences mean a lot to the small businesses who are in the heat of battle right now, trying to scramble out of very, very difficult situations. But very key is that there's no prepayment penalty here. And all of these covenants, once you are free and clear and everything is paid back, then no, government is kind of out of it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I still love your terminology at the beginning with what the U.S. Chamber did. You said speed versus perfection. And I think for most of the businesses on this call, the speed part of it was key. And now we can work through some of this as we build, your metaphor, build those airplanes and figure a couple of these things out and fix it up a little bit. If my loan is 100, you mentioned the 60%, 40% on the loan for the switching to PPP, the forgiveness on that. If the loan is 100% used for payroll, are they okay? Or does it have to meet that 60-40 split?
No, it can be used 100% payroll and then it's 100% forgiven. Yes.
Okay.
It's at least 60%.
At least 60% payroll. Mm-hmm. If the 5-year 1% loan versus so the two different, you said that last Friday it went from 2 years to 5 years on the loan.
Yes.
Is that based on application, approval, funding? So what did they have to have in last Friday?
This is interesting. So this is where I'm going to pretend to be a banker, which absolutely I am not. I'm an English major in college. I have been blessed to be an advocate for small business for over a dozen years. I love bankers, but I am not a banker, but I'll pretend to be for 1 minute. The difference is how you pay what's called papering a loan. Once you lock in with a lender that says it's a 2-year 1% loan, to change that, you have to what's called repaper the loan, this is a technical term, but it's a total pain in the ass. So once it's at that point, you can't get past that. So that is the actual technical point is when you satisfy the needs of the lender, for documentation. That package is then sent to SBA to get a loan number. It's that point that can't be changed.
Okay.
So it's somewhere in the middle of application and receiving the money. Now, lenders do have the ability to change the terms from a 2-year to a 5-year for something that happened prior to last Friday. But what I've been told by folks in the lending community is that the hassle associated with that is high.
Okay.
Those technical terms, hassle.
Oh, good. The U.S. Chamber again taking these fancy government terms and making them simple for the small businesses to understand.
Well, Jim, I got to say, it's just simple so that I can understand it.
Yeah.
The small businesses I work with have a degree of sophistication way up here. But I do want to seriously explain, though, that when our mode was speed versus perfection, it is now evolved. And our position now, when government is looking at how to improve these programs and even what an additional stimulus should look like, our mantra right now is simplicity and certainty.
Yeah.
Any step that makes it an existing program more simple, yes. And anything that gives business more certainty. So for instance, would it be good if you and other local chambers of commerce were able to get PPP loans? That adds to certainty.
Okay.
Would it be good, for instance, for if a small business owner does exactly what the local health official does to protect tells the employer to do to protect their employees and their customers, should they be given a safe harbor to protect them from frivolous lawsuits? Yes, that provides certainty. So now our mantra is simplicity and certainty.
Wonderful. I love it. Thank you for what you're doing. 2 last questions, and then we'll be wrapping up here in a couple minutes. If they've used up the money by week 10, let's say, and there's a 24-week period, can they go, and I think I know the answer, can they go ahead and put in all their paperwork with the bank to say that it's forgiven to prove it, or do they have to wait till the end of that 24-week period?
Really good question. The answer is, what does your employee count look like?
Okay.
And this is the reason why we convinced Congress to spread it out to 24 weeks. Your FTE count, your employee count, has got to be back to where it was February 20th, 2020 in order to get maximum forgiveness. There are very few businesses that are back up to that level, and they need 24 weeks to build up to that level to get the maximum forgiveness. That's the rub, Jim. I did not meet many small business owners in the past 10 weeks that had fully staffed back, that needed a PPP to get back. There are a couple who are optimistic, but none who had completely staffed back.
So last question, and I'm hopefully I get it right. They applied for the PPP, and they moved locations during the process, and it's the 25 to 40%. How does that a different? I'm guessing it's the new agreement with the different landlord. Do they just need to, I guess, get with their potential lender and prove that 40% was? It's more of that. It's less about the agreement with the lender. It's going to be, with the landlord, it's going to be more going back to having that agreement with the lender. It sounds like what you said earlier.
Jim, you're a wise man.
First time that's happened on these things. So thanks, Tom.
Your focus on the lender is absolutely accurate. And again, it's kind of the beauty of this PPP program. That lender knows the small business owner, or let's call them the borrower. And in that instance where you moved, rent is rent, whether it goes to person X or person Y. And as long as the lender views it that way, then you're fine.
Okay. But again, and I think part of the clarification is to make sure that they realize that 60% has to be used, a minimum of 60% on payroll for the PPP loan to become forgiven. And then that 40% can be the list of things you mentioned, utilities, rent, certain things like that, but a minimum 60% has to be into that payroll area. If I'm not.
Yes, although I am a lawyer by training, so it's my job to leave people a little bit more confused. As of yesterday, SBA did give us some additional comfort to say, look, this isn't an all or nothing proposition. We want to give small businesses the benefit of the doubt. And if you're trying to get back to that 60% for payroll, but you don't meet it, it's still a proportional diminution of forgiveness.
Okay.
Now, the law actually says it's all or nothing. You don't make 60, you're out. And SBA said, well, that's not how we're interpreting this.
Okay.
And I think, again, from a simplicity and certainty perspective, I think SBA got it right. And they said, PPP, when it passed the CARES Act, was very careful to say that we want to give credit to small businesses that are trying to emphasize payroll. The whole push by Congress has been, let's keep money in employees' bank accounts.
Right.
Okay. And this idea of, well, if you don't make the percentage, then you're shafted, it's just not very helpful. And so they've said, if you don't meet those percentages, you just go into this mathematical equation and proportionately will give you credit. And then the remaining balance becomes the 1% loan over either 2 years or 5 years.
And that sounds like a good solution. So it's not like you said, they got $100,000 and you met 58% payroll, under that, you don't want it to be, well, all $100,000 is now a loan. Hopefully that's the final final understanding of all that. Last question, Tom, and we really appreciate it. Employee FTE count, is it based on when the money is fully used or when the forgiveness application is submitted, or based on a certain date? So that
yes, whichever helps the business come up with that calculation, as long as whichever date you're using is before December 31st.
Okay.
Well,
Perfect.
is on December 31st or before.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, I honestly think, again, I thank you for your time. I thank the U.S. Chamber for what y'all are doing to advocate for small business across the country, partnering with our local chambers and our members here in our mission to facilitate their economic success. For those on the call, we thank you. We thank you for your time. Continue to stay strong out there, and the chamber will continue to be a resource. Tom, again, thank you. Nobody can clap and cheer like they normally do at the end. I think you would have had a standing ovation with the information, but I see some hands waving. So, Tom, thank you so much. Stay safe in DC. John Gonzalez, thanks for your help in setting this up too. Everybody have a wonderful, safe day.
Thank you, and thanks to the bankers and lenders on the line, especially, and take good care of our friend John Gonzalez. His
daughter goes to school here in Georgetown, Texas. She goes to our wonderful Southwestern University when they're actually meeting. So awesome. We like to have John in here and hanging out on our beautiful town square. So wonderful.
Can't wait to meet you all in person.
Thanks, Tom. Y'all have a great day. Bye, everybody.